Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to bring you part 2 of my Zerg vs Tyranids matchup. In this section I'll talk about the speed capabilities of each side. I'll start with ground speed since it should be relatively simple. For the Zerg, things are pretty simple. Nothing is extraordinarily fast on the ground. Granted, this is probably because they have to abide by game mechanics, but what it amounts to is that the fastest Zerg are Zerglings, which can move about as fast as a dog or big cat. Their speed in game is listed as 6.57, which doesn't really mean anything, but based on depictions, I would ballpark that speed at probably 30-ish miles per hour. I'm okay with generalizing these speeds because neither side has units that travel at supersonic speeds or teleport, so the differences between them aren't going to be extreme. We're talking about marginal advantages one way or another, nothing that will single-handedly tip the scales. The Tyranid analog to the Zergling is the Hormigaunt, which I'd guess is a bit slower than the Zerglings since they're bipedal instead of quadrupedal, but again, the difference really isn't all that extreme. So figure 25-ish miles an hour, let's just ballpark it there. Both sides also have larger units, which aren't as quick or nimble as their smaller units. For the Zerg, there's the Nidus Worms, which can help other units move around faster, and the big attackers, which are the Ultralisks, which are roughly the size of small buildings at 20 foot tall. The Tyranids have a wide variety of giant creatures at their disposal, including Carnifex, Haruspecs, Trigons, and such, and these creatures get absurdly big. Something I need to mention about Warhammer is that as a whole, it has no concept of reasonable scale, and that's really part of the fun. Every faction has units that are absolutely absurd in scale. The largest of the Tyranid units that the Imperium has encountered, at least on the ground, is the Hierophant, which has an average height of around 44 feet, so they're about double the size of Ultralisks, which are the size of buildings. Why are they so big? Because it's cool. No additional rationale really required. How fast they are is really hard to judge because of the scale we're talking about. They don't, if you were to scale them down to the size of a Zergling, they'd be very slow, but because they're so huge, they're actually covering ground pretty quickly. Yeah, they're not particularly fast. Again, the differences are going to be marginal at best. Back to the breakdown. Both sides also utilize air units. The Zerg seem to utilize more variety of standard flying units, including Mutalisks, Overseers, and Corruptors, whereas the Tyranids just use Hive Crones, which, while customizable with different weaponry and ability and stuff, are still much more limited in their variety, at least in terms of what I can dig up. Again, with the air units, the difference in speed can't be all that significant since everything is being propelled by wings, and you cannot break the sound barrier flapping wings because physics. Overseers are a significant exception here, being basically hot air balloons, so they're extremely slow, but they're not really direct combat units, they're more supporty. So, yeah, the fastest are going to be the very fast birds. Maybe we're talking sci-fi game mechanic stuff here, so hundreds of miles an hour, not breaking the sound barrier, anything above that, because, again, that's physically impossible with wings. Finally, both sides utilize subterranean movement to gain advantage on their opponents. Most Zerg units can at minimum burrow, but they can't move while burrowed, they can just hide there. But, notably, the aforementioned Nidus Worms can connect two distant points via an underground tunnel, which can then be traversed by other Zerg to move whole armies without having to cross the gap on the surface. Meanwhile, the Tyranids are capable of performing their own subterranean assaults. In fact, the aforementioned Trigons are specialized for that kind of combat. How fast any of this underground combat movement actually is really hard to say. In Starcraft, the Nidus Worms operate basically as a teleport, but according to the descriptions of what's actually going on, it's not a teleport, it's a tunnel. The Zerg are moving through them, so there's no teleportation involved, but it's safer because you don't have to go through the defensive walls or perimeters or whatever of your enemies, you can skip past them. But game mechanics and reality of what's actually going on are not super consistent. In any case, I think that about covers the ground side of things. Basically, everything is about as fast as bestial things can really move. They don't use jet engines. They don't teleport. Everything is organic in nature, which means that it's fairly limited in what it's really capable of doing. Let's move on to space. Of the two factions, Zerg have the faster than light travel because they can utilize ultra-precise warp jumps. And I'll clarify right now that the warp in StarCraft is absolutely not the same as the warp from Warhammer. In Warhammer, the warp is basically hell, which you have to travel through in order to get through to places quickly. In Starcraft, it's the sciencey MacGuffin word to say that people can go from planet to planet very quickly, and it's not very well explained. Anyway, Zerg warp travel is fantastic. They can just jump from planet to planet directly without having to go to space first, which allows Zerg to totally avoid having to engage in space combat, which is good for them because, so far as I can tell, they don't have any spaceships. Max from the future here to amend what I just said. Turns out that the Zerg actually do travel through space. They seem to have ships that never really show up in combat at all, and then some corruptors and stuff that can fly through space. Why they bothered to do this, I don't know, because their warp is apparently so accurate that they can just pull units directly off the surface of a planet and then deposit them on the surface of another planet. So I don't know why they bother going through space at all, but apparently they actually can. My mistake. Sorry about that. So yeah, they did basically teleport from the surface of one planet to the surface of another planet or onto a ship or whatever they want to teleport to, and that's it. They do not do landing craft or anything like that. They can just directly teleport from place to place and they're ready to go. They can't seem to do this as like a mid-combat thing. It's more your mission's over, so let's move the entire army from one planet to another. It's not so much, okay, we're going to do a precise jump from this point on the planet to this other point on the planet so we can outmaneuver the enemy. They have Nidus worms for that. Why they don't do that, I don't know. I think that it probably just boils down to we didn't come up with a way for Zerg to get from planet to planet, so let's just teleport them there. Tyranids, on the other hand, have space fleets and nothing else. No colonies, just ships, which you might recall from part 1, those same ships are also Tyranids, really, really massive living Tyranid spaceships, from which they deploy ground forces and generally try to eat everything organic everywhere. Yeah, that's where all of their intentional adaptation stuff happens. That's where they create their units. Yeah, all that said, while they do have space fleets, hive fleets more precisely, their faster than light travel sucks for everyone. They don't travel through the warp, so there's no risk of chaos-corrupted Tyranids, which is good for literally everyone, though there's reasons for that I'll be going into later in the series that I don't know if chaos-corrupted Tyranids are even possible. For now, not important. Instead of traveling through the warp, they warp space-time themselves. Basically, they utilize a specialized ship called a narval, which uses highly sensitive sensors to detect the locations of planetary systems somehow, and then it uses some space magic MacGuffin to warp space-time in a corridor between their location and their destination, which gets the entire fleet vaguely in the ballpark of their target. Meanwhile, because they're distorting space-time along that corridor really dramatically, everything that corridor passes by gets absolutely devastated. It causes massive earthquakes, solar flares, tidal waves, and other natural disasters all along the way. It's really bad for everyone. Then they arrive. And traveling along that corridor really doesn't take all that long, but again, it gets them in the ballpark. So they'll drop out of their faster than light travel corridor, maybe a few years or even decades away from their actual target. So yeah, if you're an Imperium citizen on a planet that they're targeting, then a Tyranid warp corridor shows up, causes a whole bunch of natural disasters that cause, collapsed buildings and a bunch of death and destruction on the planet all over the place. And then you get to watch as the inevitable happens, as this massive hive fleet of devouring monsters approaches your planet, and there's nothing you can do about it, and they'll be here in a few years. And by the way, the Imperium doesn't care enough to evacuate you. So yeah, you get to watch the dinner bell get ever closer as they're going to turn you into food. Yeah, for the Tyranids, there is no hurry. They'll eat it all eventually. And yeah, that's all I've got on this section. I gotta say, when I started this, I expected to find a bit more information on Zerg spacecraft, because some of the depictions show starscapes or whatever, so it seems to be implied that they have some kind of spacecraft, but it is not a focus for them. So yeah, I didn't realize that they were basically just teleported from planet to planet without the need for a fleet. So yeah, that kind of helps to explain as well why they're really hard to stop, because you can't just blockade a planet. They can just disappear on you. And yeah, all the investment that the Terran and Protoss put into their fleets don't help. because there's nothing to stop in space. Next up, I'll be talking about the offensive capabilities of each side, which should be pretty fun. But in the meantime, what do you all think? Did I miss something really important on either side? Do the Zerg actually have a massive solar navy that I somehow missed? I don't think so, but it'd be really nice to know if I did. Let me know in the comments, and until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.